Ryan Wagner is the Guinness National Brand Ambassador and Head of Marketing and Community Partnerships for the Open Gate Brewery. And of course, it's St. Patrick's Day, so we got to chat with Ryan. Thank you so much for your time today, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to you.
And also, you think of wearing green, but you also think of Guinness with the holiday as well too. I mean, such a rich history. 1759. I mean, let's talk a little bit about that rich history of this beer.
And we've been around a long time, and it's not just a beer. It's a brewery. I think part of the reason why the Open Gate Brewery exists is to remind people that Guinness is about way more than just that one pint of Guinness Draft Stout that they may know and love. Arthur Guinness signed a lease on our property at St. James's Gate, where we still brew beer today, on December 31st, 1759. So New Year's Eve, a bit of a flair for the dramatic old Arthur had. And really from that point until the late 1700s, he was focused on brewing the styles of beer that most people in that part of the world were drinking, which were pale ales and amber ales. It wasn't until the late 1700s that Arthur decided to refocus his attention on what was a growing dark style of beer at that time called porter. And that's how dark beer really comes into fashion for Guinness. It was the horses that he had hitched his cart to. He saw the popularity. He saw how much it was changing the beer world. And so from 1801 or so, there are very few recipes in those early years of anything other than that dark beer. A beer in 1801 that was released, then called West Indies Porter, eventually transitions into a beer called Foreign Extra Stout, a little higher alcohol content, a little more hops, which helped the beer survive those long journeys back then. That beer, Foreign Extra Stout, is still a beer that is incredibly popular around the world for Guinness. So that global outreach is something that really is a huge part of who we are. And when we think about St. Patrick's Day, obviously everybody is Irish today, but Guinness exists in so many different places around the world, and that's something we get to build on in a place like Chicago.
And you think of the brewery there in Dublin, and definitely if you are planning a trip there, it's a must do activity and a must go see place there while you're there. And this is the second outpost here in the United States that we're going to get here later this summer. Tell me a little bit about what we can expect, because it's beer, it's food, it's desserts, it's coffee, it's community. I mean, there's so many aspects to it.
Yeah, there really are. I think that what excites us about being in the States, we built our brewery, as you mentioned, in Baltimore, and now we're excited to open the second brewery here in Chicago. The work that the American beer industry has done to create incredibly vibrant and creative and innovative spaces and beers and menus and incorporating community, as you mentioned, all of that work over the last 3 or 4 decades has really led to what is at this point in time maybe the most vibrant beer scene anywhere in the world here in the States. So when you come into the Open Gate Brewery Chicago, the number one thing I want people to realize is that this is not Guinness as usual. I think a lot of people are going to have one kind of preconceived notion of what Guinness is. And what we do is try to flip that on its head. So at any given time, you'll see 12 to 16 different beers from Guinness. Most of them are going to be made locally here in Chicago. We'll obviously import a few beers from Dublin. That's our home. That's where Guinness Draft Stout will always be brewed. And from a beer point of view, lots of creativity. Everything you can dream, we're probably going to brew, whether that's sour beers, barrel-aged beers, IPAs, porters, brown ales, amber ales. The sky is the limit when it comes to the beer menu. From a food point of view, you'll see some inspiration from Dublin. You'll see some inspiration from our first home in Baltimore. Crab cakes are going to be on the menu. You'll see some of that Chicago flair. We're going to try to become a part of what is, in my mind, the most burning question in Chicago, which is, where's the best pizza? We're going to put an offering out there in terms of pizza. But then also, as I mentioned, the global influence, right? So you'll see maybe influence from West Africa, from the Caribbean, places like Malaysia, places where Guinness has long existed. We can authentically tell some of those stories in the flavors that we create in our tap list and on our food menu. And then from a community standpoint, look, this is a place where Chicago comes together, right? We want every one of the 77 neighborhoods that make Chicago what it is represented in that tap room, whether that's on a menu, artwork that's hanging on the walls, the music that we bring in to add some life and some vibrancy to the space. And the bakery is going to be a big part of it as well. We're going to have the first bespoke Guinness bakery anywhere in the world inside that tap room. We've been baking brown bread and donating it to our local food bank partners in Baltimore for a long time now. It's something that was generated during COVID. We'll continue that work here in Chicago. We're still putting the fine details on that. But look, at the end of the day, Guinness exists to build bonds between people. That's what it does. And so there's a lot of great work that I think we can do here in Chicago, building on work that's already taking place.
One of the things that we didn't talk about was one of my favorite parts of the Dublin brewery that we got to go visit was all the merch. I have my Guinness shirt here. When I was in Dublin, are we going to have any Chicago specific merch available?
Oh, I think you just got to look at my shirt, right? I mean, I got a little bit going on right here. Yeah, look, there is some iconography here in Chicago, starting with the flag. I mean, the flag means a lot to the people in this town. It's something that's identifiable. I come from a state in Maryland where the flag is everywhere. So when you look at Chicago, I think that the people coming into that space are going to be as diverse and unique as anywhere in the world. And I think the merchandise needs to reflect that as well. So we're going to incorporate as much of Chicago as we can. Now, that means using things like the flag as often as we can, but also as intentionally as we can. But I think that also means working with the local makers and local artists that power Chicago in many ways. So when we talk about the merchandise we create, a lot of it is going to be influenced by the people that have a bit of Chicago in their soul and use that to create the art and create the tangible things that really are the soul of this city.
That's going to be amazing. 1910 was the first time that we got Guinness here in the Chicagoland area. Tell me a little bit if there's a story as far as it first, becoming available in our city.
Yeah, again, a lot of people associate Guinness with just Guinness Draft Stout, which is an amazing beer. It's a desert island beer for me, certainly for a lot of people out there. That beer didn't debut until 1959. It didn't arrive in the States until 1965. So 55 years before Guinness Draft Stout arrives on American shores, Guinness beer arrived in Chicago. So the story of Guinness beer in the United States dates back to 1817. That's when the first barrels of extra stout, at that point it would have been a porter, arrived in Charleston, South Carolina. And from there, that relationship between the U.S. and Guinness just continues to grow. The first barrels that would have rolled into town here in Chicago would have been barrels of a beer called Extra Stout. It would have been served on draft, quote unquote. But back then you were pulling beer out of the barrels using gravity or hand cranking the beer out of the barrels. And so that's a big part of this story. I think, a lot of people have asked, what's this new home for Guinness going to be like in Chicago? And in many ways, it's kind of a homecoming. We've been here a long, long time, 13 years. We have some history here in this city. So Guinness is not a new idea for the people of Chicago. What is a new idea is taking that book that's 260 years old and adding a brand new chapter that is Chicago focused. But there's a lot of cool stories. I think in many ways, when you think about Guinness's history in the United States, a big part of that story is Chicago. And I think there are parts of the Chicago story, particularly in beer, that are, Guinness inspired in many ways. So when we blend those two things together, I think at the heart of that, that's the Open Gate Brewery.